Next on Garden Line, the Fighting Stallions Memorial in Pierre, picking nursery plants.
So just tap a couple of small ones right out of the pot and take a look at that root system.
And planting trees.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm Stephen Monk. Tonight we will feature the flowering shrubbery at the Fighting Stallions Memorial on the Capitol grounds in Pierre. We'll also go to a nursery to learn how to select plants that will grow up to the healthy and strong size that we'd like to have them. And then we will learn the proper method of planting those trees. Join me in the studio tonight to answer these questions is John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Agronomy Educator, John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist, and Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist. The phone number for you to call is 1-866-595-SDSU. And that once again is 866-595-7378. Helping answer the phones tonight is a group from the North Central Agricultural Research Lab. Please provide them with as much and as many details as possible about the garden problem that you're calling in about, when it was first appearing on your plants, and perhaps even some information on the surrounding plants that deal with your question. Now, before we get to our questions, we went to a nursery to buy a tree and some shrubs. Garden Line spoke with John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, to learn just what qualities to look for in plants at the nursery.
Well, it's spring, and with that comes coming out to garden centers, and I'll tell you, just about any nice Saturday, there's lots of people streaming in a garden center. But you need to do a couple things before you even show up. First of all, have an idea of what you want to plant and where you want to plant it. Otherwise, what's going to happen, you're going to come to a garden center, and everything in bloom, like these beautiful plums, you're going to buy. And why they're wonderful plants, and you ought to have a few in your landscape, too often people buy just what's in flower at the garden center, and then by summer and fall they really don't have the colors in that they want. Well, if you got an idea what you want to plant, next thing is to come out and take a look at the trees. And the first thing is look at the tags. One of the very first things you want to make sure is that it's hardy for your area, and almost all the plants at garden centers will have a label that'll tell you that. Most of South Dakota is in Zone 4. North Dakota is Zone 4 and 3, so check your area and make sure that it's least hardy to your area. The lower the number, the farther north it can grow. So if you're in a Zone 5, buying material at Zone 4 is even better. If you're in 4, buying material hardy to Zone 3 is just as good, if not better. Next thing is look at the quality of the stock. Most of our trees are grafted, so at the base you'll find this little bulge. That bulge should be visible. It should be above the container soil. Next, take a look at the trunk. You might as well start out with a nice straight trunk to begin with, and then look further up and make sure the tree has one single leader, one single stem that's higher than the rest. If you buy a plant like this, that little bulge showing, straight stem, good branching pattern, and one single leader, you bought a high quality tree. Well, now we'll take a look at some container shrubs. They're a little easier to pick out than trees, but the same rules apply. Don't just buy everything in bloom in the spring. Make sure you got plants that are going to give you color throughout the season. Begin also by looking at the tag. The tag on the shrub will also show the hardiness zone. In this case, we have a plant hardy to Zone 3 to 7. In our zone, this is going to be a good hardy plant. Next thing is make sure that it's well branched, as this plant is. And another little tip, now don't do this to every plant. You'll have the garden center upset. But it never hurts to just tap a couple of small ones right out of the pot and take a look at that root system, and there's a beauty. You want to see these very fine roots around the edge. What you don't want is roots that continue to curl all the way around. If you get those, you've got a plant that's actually pot bound. So, with checking out nursery stock for both trees and shrubs, a couple simple tips. make sure you've got an idea in mind what you want to buy before you show up. Then check the tags, make sure they're hardy. For trees, make sure they got a good straight stem and 1 single leader, and for shrubs, pop a few out of the pot, not all of them. Make sure you've got a root system like this, not big roots going around, and that again, it's hardy. If you do that, you're on your way to have a wonderful landscape.
All right. Good information there, John. Appreciate that. So, and now I guess we're to the part of the show where we do a little bit of round table and what the topic of the week is going to be that you want to talk about. John, we're going to start with you first tonight.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I'm going to talk just a little bit about ants. I've had a number of calls about ants in the last week, and even going back a little bit farther than that. And really what we end up dealing with in ants, especially in gardens, we have a couple different types. The one that everyone seems to be concerned about around here would be one of the mound building or thatch ants that build some fairly large mounds in the grass. People hit them with the lawnmowers about this time of year, and then they call up and they want to know what to do about them. Best thing to do with those ants really is just leave them alone. They're great predators of other insects. If you can stand having them there, if you can live with them a little bit, they'll do good things for the garden and really help keep some things healthy there. In those cases where you can't live with them, best method to try to get rid of them is to simply rake the top of that mound off, put some dust formulation or powder formulation of an insecticide in there, and then rake it back in. You want to make sure that any insecticide you put on is labeled for that use before you put it on, and then you may need to water that area lightly to help work that into the soil a little bit.
Good. That's probably one of the first types of insects that come out after the winter is those ants. They really get active.
They overwinter as adults as well, and it makes a difference. They're ready to go in the spring.
They're ready to go. Now, John, our other John for the night. You brought in some really pretty looking samples there, and they must not have been out in too strong a wind for all the petals that are still on those.
Well, you're right there, Steve. I mean, it's another windy day in South Dakota, but when isn't it? Yeah, I brought in two because this is just a strange year. And I know we say that almost every year in South Dakota, but this is really one for the books. Normally, we don't have lilacs blooming this early. I'm impressed. They're already flowering. I keep records from year to year, and we often have it 2 weeks after this date. And so this is unusually early for lilacs to be blooming, but they're fantastic. And who didn't, as a kid, cut off a bouquet and bring it in for mom to take in a vase and set on top of the TV? Most folks have plasma anymore. You can't set them on top of the TV anymore. But in the old day, when the TV was about the size of a car, you could set a whole bouquet on the top. The other one in bloom, and they're blooming at the same time, and again, it's an unusual year, are crab apples. And two things about this. First of all, the flowers are already beginning to fade on the crab apples, and the leaves are already out. And if you haven't done any of your treatments yet for apple scab, don't worry, can't do them anymore. Those first two sprays are the most critical ones. You miss those, you're not going to have much more success. So you might as well give up at this point and expect that you're probably going to see leaves falling in midsummer. But, you know, if you get a chance, because who knows how long spring is going to last, get out and smell the lilacs. They're nice for about another week.
All right. Thank you, John. Larry, you got a nice little green sample for us to look at tonight.
Mine doesn't smell nearly as good as John's. These are cabbage seedlings, and everybody around here noticed that as soon as I took those out of the bag that we had something that wasn't really that fresh. It's the smell is not from a disease, it's simply the cabbage. But what we're showing here is some damping off, and there are some slides to show a little better images of that. Right now, people are starting their seeds to grow on their shelves or on their kitchen window, getting those seeds ready to plant in the garden. The idea here is they can save a little money, buy the seed packet rather than the flats at the garden center. Well, the problem is a lot of times we don't have the right light, we don't water those properly, and they end up damping off. What you see here in the slide is Pythium causing a root rot and causing those seedlings to fail. Another type of damping off would be Rhizoctonia, another soil-borne fungus. You see what we call wire stem. You see that very narrow part of the stem closest to the soil line. Those fungi live in the soil, and they try to attack the plants when the plants aren't happy. What we have to do is make those plants happy all the time, and to keep them from being infected, we do a few things. Number one, if you're having problems with this, try pasteurizing your soil mix. You can do this in your oven at home if you're not starting lots and lots of seeds. a cake pan with some moist soil, put it in there at 200 degrees, use your old meat thermometer until that soil gets up to about 140 to 160 degrees for about 15 or 20 minutes. It's a good way to kill off most of the pathogens and still leave some of the good guys left in the soil. But provide those seedlings with good air circulation. A nice gentle breeze is going to keep the air moving, keep that soil line free from water buildup. And then water management. Don't dump water over the top of these things. That's going to lead to that damping off problem. Water from below, let them sit in water for maybe 15 minutes and then take the water away and let them naturally dry down. After that, you can rewater them as often as necessary, but just don't inundate them and we'll avoid some of that Pythium problem.
All right, good. Now, does that typically show up on more of our younger seedlings than mature plants, or is it about the same?
Well, the gardeners are noticing it right now, getting a lot of calls. Of course, they see that in their flats. They're not getting enough light a lot of times, and the plants just aren't happy. But we can see it in the garden, too, later on. If we've had an excessively wet weather, the Pythium can take advantage of that, or the Rhizoctonia, and cause a plant go over right in the garden.
Good. Thank you. Mike.
Well,
what's in the weed world?
Well, to kind of build off of what John just mentioned here with the lilacs, yeah, the lilacs are early and so is everything else. You know, the weeds are early too. And as we mentioned last week, you know, when the lilacs bloom, that's kind of the signal to go after our crabgrass, those crabgrass preventers. And we talked about that last week. So if you did have crabgrass in your lawn last year and you're thinking about using those pre-emergence crabgrass preventers, lilacs are blooming, now's the time we want to do that. So keep that in mind. The other weed I want to mention this week is burr buttercup. We had a question last week, and I had educator Bob Fanning down in Lyman County talk about this. Apparently, Kennebec, Presho area, a lot of problems with burr buttercup, and it's kind of a West River thing. It's really a nasty weed now. It's pretty small. It's only maybe a ½ inch to an inch tall, and it gets that little tiny burr. And maybe several weeks ago it had that flower. But it goes through its vegetative phase very early in the spring and only for about 2 weeks, and then it's done. Now, on the next slide here, we can see kind of the aftermath. The next slide here, we'll see a little patch of burr buttercup, maybe. There we go. During maybe midsummer, about that time, the rest of the plant will dry down, but those burrs will stay behind, and they are nasty burrs. I mean, you will feel it. If you kneel down, if you step on that with your bare foot, very nasty. There's another kind of patch there. But notice that grass. Notice how thin that grass is. Getting a good grass stand is kind of key to managing this stuff. But the bottom line for managing burr buttercup is you just have to get out there really early in the spring. If you want to use a herbicide, you know, usually early April, that type of thing, before that burr is produced. And you only have a week or two to do this. Otherwise, you're too late. The non-herbicide option is really to get that turf thickened up if you can. Maybe try a, buffalo grass type of thing if you're having a hard time getting bluegrass growing there, that type of thing. So burr buttercup, one to watch for, but very difficult to manage.
All right, thank you very much. Yep. Now, with the cool weather that's coming, they can still go ahead and put their pre-emergence on, even though it may cool down for a little bit, but having theirs ready to go.
And actually, that's this kind of cool, wet weather we've been having is really ideal. A lot of that stuff is on a fertilizer granule. And so if we have 4 days of no rain, at least the cool weather will help prevent volatilization or loss of the herbicide and the nitrogen. So ideally, do it right before a rain if you can.
Good, perfect. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Hey, last week Garline made its way across the state and stopped in Pierre for a walk around the Capitol complex. And here's a glimpse at the landscaping around the Fighting Stallions Memorial. All right, good. That was really some nice landscaping views that we had there. So let's get into the questions and answers here, which is part of the main portion of the show. First one comes from Rapid City. Aerating a lawn. Can I do this based off the tree along the edge of the drip line or to the trunk of the tree, or should I avoid doing so as not to disturb the root system? Basically, I think the aeration process, is it going to hurt or damage the tree or root zone, John?
Well, that's a good question, but one of the things I would ask is, how are they planning on aerating? Is this hollow tine aeration, where they're going through and just making these very small holes in there that don't go very deep? If that's the case, you know, staying out about 6 feet from the trunk of the tree should avoid really any damage. If they're going deeper than that, you're going to need to stay a little farther away, and if they're doing this horribly inefficient method where you're just pushing something down into the soil, so essentially you're compacting it, then you're probably not helping your turf nor your trees. But in general, if they're doing the proper methods of hollow tine aeration, 6 feet from the trunk of the tree should be sufficient.
All righty. We mentioned that cool weather that's coming, and this one's from winter. Cold and snow predicted for our area. How can she protect peony, iris, other perennials from frost or freezing? Or is that necessary if we have snow?
Drive to Omaha.
Which is a good reason why you said, look for those zone 4 plants.
Yeah, the nice thing is irises I wouldn't be too concerned about. They're pretty tough. If she's a little worried about it, and winter's the land of extremes, it'll be 115 there this July, one way to help reduce problems is just water the soil thoroughly. If you keep the soil moist and the temperatures get down towards freezing, that will keep the plants from being damaged. It's a pretty simple technique, but wetting the soil helps.
And actually, a lot of people, the snow is really not that much of a damaging factor. It's the cold air. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
If it is just light snow as that melts, that's not going to be a problem. For those plants, there's others that may be damaged.
All right. Mike, preen. Can she use it for weed control in the vegetable garden?
Yeah, you can. That's what it's made for. But we do kind of recommend avoiding it if you can. It works if you're real careful. The problem with your vegetable garden, though, is you have so many different vegetables growing side by side, and calibration is an issue. You got to make sure you're not using too much, otherwise you can get carryover maybe to your corn or something like that next year, to a sensitive vegetable next year. And so those are some of the tricky things that we deal with preen. So yeah, you could use it, but just use it sparingly and make sure you really follow that label and don't overdo it. It's only going to give you some weed suppression. It's not going to control all your weeds, and so it'll help, but it's not going to be a perfect solution to everything. So still recommend going in with the mulch and that sort of thing, and doing some of those other things as well. And you could do the preen and the mulch also. But the key is make sure if you're going to use a preen, get it out there before the weeds germinate or emerge, because that's how it works only on the germinating weed seedling.
All right. Gerber daisies. How hardy are they, and what kind of care should they need, or do they need? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, we grew those over in Minnesota. And so where'd they call from?
Sioux Falls.
Yeah, that's kind of the Miami of South Dakota. Yeah, they can grow them, and they really don't require any more care than almost any other plant for that. So they're a nice plant. I like the flowers to them. A little unusual.
Okay. Now this is another one for you here, John. I have a slip of a tree received at Art History, planted into a bucket of potting soil, and currently in the house. Can I leave it in the bucket for a while, or how long? And should I plant it now? Or should I plant it now?
And do they know what it is?
Well, and that's what I was looking for here. That's probably pretty important to know what kind of tree it is, if slip would even work well on that. So is this something that they probably should collect a little more information on? And
boy, that certainly, because they could have collected something, or I'd say, keep it inside all year so it doesn't realize it's in South Dakota. Or it could be something that we'd want to get out relatively soon. So we do need to know the plant in that case.
All right. This one here, it says, hi, I'm looking for a shrub 3 to 4 foot tall, looks nice in the winter, and sometimes the birds like it. I'd like to put 3 by the bird feeder outside our window. Any suggestions on what we should buy?
Yeah, got a great one, so write it down. It's called Huron, just like the city, Huron gray dogwood, Huron gray dogwood. And it has to be Huron because the gray dogwood, the species, will actually get about 12 feet tall. But Huron, that particular cultivar of gray dogwood, gets about 3 to 4 feet. So it fits the size that they're looking for, and about 3 to 4 feet wide. So it's a nice little ball. It has kind of silvery gray stems to it. It has brilliant red fall color, just a nice deep burgundy. White flowers from spring now into early summer, but the thing they'll really like about it is gray dogwood is a bird magnet. And the fruit that's going to form on it this summer, the birds will take. Gray dogwood is one of our best shrubs for attracting a wide variety of birds. And what's interesting is after the birds eat the fruit, the pedestals, the tiny stalks of which they support the fruit, actually are colorful. And they provide some fall and winter interest, and who would think of that? So if they want to try something a little different, you know, I checked, they can obtain it in South Dakota. And it's certainly hardy here. It's hardy in North Dakota and adaptable to a wide range of soils, but it's not something they may find very easily, so I'd ask. But it has to be the Huron gray dogwood, not just any gray dogwood. Okay. Get that one, they'll be happy.
But they can buy it other than just Huron?
I would hope so.
All right. We are trying to grow sweet potatoes indoors. Can you tell me how it should be done? We cut the potatoes in half, and then when the sprouts came out, we broke them off and placed them in water. But they aren't growing roots too fast. We need your help.
Boy, that might be tricky, huh? Growing potatoes indoors? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sweet potato.
Yeah, sweet potato. Any root crop indoors is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Usually sweet potatoes, aren't they grown by slips and outdoors under black plastic is what I've heard. So.
Yeah, it's not kind of like, it's not a potato.
Yeah, no. So I'm not sure. They may get green vegetation on this, but I'm not sure if they're actually going to get potatoes off it with this method.
No, that's, again, because it's sweet potato. Yeah. They're going to get what they expect.
Okay. It's the best we can do for this one?
Yeah, that's all right. I'm afraid.
Okay. Easy solution. Big bucket, baby.
Big bucket.
Question. The snow this past winter broke the central leader off my Zestar apple trees. It is a standard tree which was planted in the fall of 2008. Because it was broken beyond repair, I cut the leader just above a bud which has now started to leaf out. Will that become the central leader? Do I need to train it? Is there anything I can do to salvage this tree? And I think we have a graphic of that one.
Let's hope so, because it's a good picture.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is a great picture, and here's the primary reason why. The top of it, you can see, easily was broke several feet off the ground. And the reason for that is if it was broken at ground level, what may be coming up is from the rootstock, so you're not going to get a Zestar anymore. Since it was that high, they know that the side branch coming off it will be the cultivar that they purchased. But yes, what they're going to need to do is that bud that grows at the top, train it to grow upright. And they can easily do that with even a bamboo stake. Lightly tied, twist tie, but not so tight to girdle it, and support it in an upright position for about a year, and they usually harden in that position. I mean, I've done that on some trees on campus that kids have broken off the tops, and after a few years it's hard to tell that I essentially bent a branch to form the new terminal. So that's what I would do. The only thing I cringed at is, where were they calling from? I guess I should have checked that. Or emailing from?
I do not have that information on here.
Oh, well.
It does not say.
Because they said it was a standard size tree. Yeah. And, you know, standard size tree is going to take a long time to grow. It's going to be a big tree. And they may be waiting 8 years before they get fruit. And generally speaking, if you're in the southern part of the state, I like to see semi-dwarfs. Because at that point, you know, in 4 years, well, actually, this year they could start getting fruit off that a little bit. And 2 more years, they'd probably be getting a pretty good crop. So. South half of the state, south of 212, I like to see semi-dwarf fruits.
I've heard semi-dwarfs might not be as hardy as standards. Is there any truth to that? Or?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting because they developed the rootstocks in Kent, England to make the semi-dwarfs. Kent, England, South Dakota, what's in common? Nothing. Yeah. So you're right, they're not as hardy, and that's why if you're the northern part of the state or West River, until you get to the hills, standard size trees are your best. But, you know, Brookings and further south, semi-dwarfs actually work quite nicely. But you're absolutely right. In our state, it depends on where you live.
Okay.
Did you explain how or why a branch would become a main leader, or how the tree makes that its main leader?
Oh, well, that's easy. I mean, young trees are like kids. They can be trained. should be trained. All right, quite often on kids, but that's ignored. But with trees, they're so pliable, you can bend that branch. And once it's straight up and above the rest of the branches, it does produce a growth regulator that essentially tells everybody else, I'm the alpha. And it will become the leader.
So the king of the pile
so
becomes the hill.
Yeah, so that's easy to do.
Now this is kind of an interesting question here, and some of this I think we'll have to refer them to another agency as well to get this information. It says, we have a very large garden with some water drainage issues in the spring. The past 2 years we've had standing water that drowns out our plants. What are the rules for putting in drainage according to the Wetlands Act? And if you can't put in drainage, do you have any suggestions that we can do to help drain the water away or soak up in a quicker fashion before causing damage to our garden?
What town?
Storla.
In town, obviously, maybe. You know, that's quite often, sometimes those are neighbor issues too. So yeah, I'm afraid we're going to have to probably refer that one.
Okay.
I mean, the only other thing you can do, and this might be something they want to do with their garden, it's not a bad thing to do with any garden, is why not do raised beds? You know, in fact, what I did is I took cedar planks, cedar boards, and made 4 foot wide, 8 foot long raised beds, just raise them 1.5 feet. I mean, it's nice for gardening. You're not bending over as much. Your production is excellent in those, very easy to till. So if they're having moisture problems, I mean, if they're standing water in there, that's goes beyond it. But if it's just poorly drained, I would say, you know, you're probably never going to dry it out enough. I would go to raised beds.
Yeah. And I'm not sure as far as ordinances, if they are in the city, it'd be related to that city, I would assume, if they have any type of ordinances. If it's any kind of land or agricultural land that's in the farm program, then they'd have to visit with their NRCS office, I would imagine, to come up with those details. But must be a big garden for that to have happen. So, okay. Okay. Well, it looks like, flower bed with moss. Flower bed with moss. That's killing irises and columbines. What can be done to control moss?
Well, there's a lot of things. Moss is not very hardy, and in fact, you know, we get these questions a lot in lawns. You know, people get nervous about the moss and that sort of thing. But you got to ask: is the moss really doing anything to your plants? I mean, is this really something you really need to be controlling? I mean, it's not very competitive. It's only living on excess moisture, that sort of thing. So it's you know. I mean, if you want to go for it, okay, there's a lot of options. And, you know, there's a lot of, you know, most of your broadleaf herbicides, that sort of thing, but this isn't an iris thing, so you're going to have to be careful. If you wanted to, you know, if you do like a non-herbicide option, I'm guessing, you know, like a vinegars type solution, you spray that, try not to get as much on the iris leaves, you know, because it'll burn those iris leaves, but, you know, maybe a vinegar solution will defoliate that moss, that type of thing. Moss is really quite sensitive, but you know, whenever you're trying to control any of this stuff, you're looking at the chance of injuring those irises, and so, you know, I would only do it if as necessary, or maybe go in with a little type of a pick type trowel and dig it up, that sort of thing. But vinegar is probably going to be okay to defoliate the moss otherwise.
You know, usually when I see moss problems, the moss is an indication of a problem rather than being the problem.
Yeah,
you know, shading, poorly drained soils.
In lawns, that's usually the case. It's usually your lawn is thin, and then the moss comes in. It's not that the moss is choking out your grass or choking out your flowers. It's just, you know, there's just some space there for it to live, and there it goes.
Usually shaded, moist conditions and such. But
so the moss is growing in a favorable condition for it, which may not be all that favorable for the grass.
Right, or for their plants. I mean, iris and moss, that's kind of a unique combination.
Yeah, it's not something I would get concerned about. The moss shouldn't cause any problems, and I would, you know, maybe minimize the water and, you know.
Water or light. I mean, how much light are they getting on those irises?
Yeah, it sounds to me like their plants are suffering, and they're concerned that it's the moss doing it. I agree with John.
Probably not the moss.
Probably not the moss. It's the environment.
All right.
Taking care of things there.
John, what we started with tonight as far as black ants in my yard, many big hills all over. There seems to be increasing numbers of them. What can we do to get rid of them?
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. Those black ants are the common ones that get into the lawns. You know, like I said, if you can possibly live with them, it's a good thing to live with. But if you can't, best way to do it is simply rake the top of those mounds off, and then once they're disturbed, you put that granular or powder insecticide in there, rake it in lightly again, and maybe water it just a little bit to help work that insecticide in. And you may have to repeat that 2 or 3 times or even more to get effective control of those ants.
Okay. John, snowy mountain ash, will it get borers or blight? If so, is there another ash that you recommend that's better suited?
Well, again, we might as well clarify for everybody, we're talking about a mountain ash here. And mountain ash have nothing in common with the true ash except similar name. So the mountain ash, they do get borers, though that's not a real common problem in South Dakota. Usually the tree's pretty much on its way out before the borers occur. But it does have a problem with fire blight. And we see an awful lot of mountain ash with fire blight after about 5 or 10 or 15 years, particularly on poorly drained soils. So if they'd like a mountain ash that has relatively few problems, then it's kind of pretty. One I really recommend is the Korean mountain ash. The Korean mountain ash has a simple leaf. It doesn't have the compound leaf as the other mountain ash, so it looks a little different. It actually has a good fall color. We've got one on campus that really colors nice in the fall. Has very large flowers and an abundance of fruit, which the birds certainly will enjoy as they do with most mountain ash. Plus, this mountain ash seems to be fairly well adapted to our soil. So, you know, if they want to try one that has less of these problems, it's not immune to fire blight and that, but seems to have much less trouble, I would recommend the Korean mountain ash.
Okay.
It's a pretty tree.
Follow up to our earlier question on the slip that we talked about. It seems like we have a small seedling sugar maple in the bucket. Yes.
Cool. And where are they?
Brookings.
Oh, well, get that little baby outside. Once we get this little cold period behind us, the end of this week, I would plant it outside. And if they've got a nice little garden spot, I'd put it in there. A little lath over top of it would be nice, a little screening, because they don't do very well in full sun to begin with. You don't want dense shade either. But, you know, we'd use shade cloth, but I doubt if they have that. But even some screening, something to help kind of diffuse the light would be helpful. Garden is nice because it's tilled. You know, you don't have any competition. Keep it watered. You know, by the end of the year, it's probably going to be an amazing 6 inches tall. But it'll be on its way. But they're a nice tree. I mean, we've got one at Brookings. The fall color is just to die for. It's so nice. So I'm glad they're growing it. It's a good tree. But yeah, get it outside. It's not going to be happy sitting near the TV.
Be happy outside.
It'll be a lot happier
Give
outside.
it some room. So.
Yep.
Well, good. Earlier, we went to the nursery with John where he talked about purchasing trees and shrubs. And now we're back home. And it's time for John to share with us as far as that important process of making sure that we have that tree properly planted. John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist.
Well, today we're going to show you how to plant a container growing tree. But before you dig the hole, always make sure you check for utilities. Once you've done that, know where your utilities are, you can dig the hole. The hole should be dug about twice the diameter as the container itself, and then not as deep. Because one of the problems we have with container growing trees is they come too deep in the container, and you need to reestablish the original grade. So once you have that hole dug, pull the tree gently out of the container, set the container to the side, and then find the original root system. Now you'll notice a crook here. That crook is where the tree was grafted. The original root zone is usually 3 inches below that. So one of the first things I need to do is to come out here and cut away the top until I find that ball. Well, now I've removed all that excess soil at the top of the container, and you'll always find a few little roots, but don't let that worry you. Now I've reestablished that original grade. You see that crook? You go down about 2 to 3 inches and you'll find the first root. That's where you need to have it set for planting. Not where the soil was, but where the first root is, and you'll notice we removed about 1/3 of the soil from that container. Well, now we'll roll it in the hole, add some of this nice soil that we got right out of that container. We'll use that to kind of prop it up, and even add a little bit more, because we don't want to end up planting it too deep. That should be right at the soil grade, so we'll add a little bit more soil underneath there. Now that we've done that, I can finish filling it in. Well, there, we've got all the soil back in. Now you notice I didn't put any additional soil in there. I didn't put any peat moss or topsoil or anything else. Never put anything in the hole that you didn't pull out of the hole except for the container soil. That's the best way to plant. Notice we've got that grade reestablished. There's that upper root right at the soil surface. Now there's only one more thing to do, and that's water. The amount of water to add depends on the size of a tree. On a small tree like this, 2 inches in diameter, you want to add about 2 gallons of water each watering. And we're going to water this tree now with 2 gallons of water each watering about 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the amount of rain we get. And we're going to do that for the entire growing season. After we've got it nicely watered in like this, the tree's all set for its new home. Just add a little mulch, and you're going to have something that's going to last you a lifetime.
All right. Thank you, John, for all that helpful information tonight on selection and proper planting of those trees and shrubs. So.
We'll see if it lives.
So, all right. Now we'll get back to the question and answer session. And the next question we have here is moles. How to get rid of a mole in the garden?
Trapping. That's going to be about your best method for getting rid of a mole, is going to be to go out and purchase a mole trap and keep at it until you get them, hopefully. And that's going to be really about all you can do.
Yeah.
Now there's all these folk remedies out there and that sort of thing. I've heard, you know, might as well open the door to this. I've heard you could squirt a little perfume maybe in the hole. Got some old perfume that you don't like, that might scare them out. They don't like that. And
I'll have to try that sometime.
Yeah,
I haven't had any luck with any of the home remedies.
it sounds good, I guess. I haven't tried it either, but that's one thing that I've heard that might be worth a try. If you're looking for, you know, a less aggressive form of scaring them out.
I've heard of human hair also.
Doesn't work. I tried it.
And there was, for a while, juicy fruit gum, putting that down in the tunnels and so on. So, but if they want to go the trapping, they certainly can contact their local extension office on how to properly set those traps if they want to try that. And you're more than welcome, I guess, to try any of these other remedies, but there's no guarantee.
Let us know if they work.
Use the cheap stuff.
There you go.
You might be not want. So, okay.
High karate.
Queen Anne's lace from Rapid City. They have Queen Anne's lace invading, taking over their lawn. It originally came in a wildflower packet. They want to know what to do and what to use to get rid of it to help save their lawn.
Yeah, Queen Anne's lace is probably one of the toughest weeds we have out there. And that, you know, and be aware. I mean, there's a good lesson in all this. Some of those ornamentals, they can get kind of aggressive, and Queen Anne's lace is one of them that can eventually kind of creep into the lawn and be very tough to control. Gosh, you know, there's just not a lot of options out there. You know, it doesn't respond to herbicides real well, but you know, that's, you know, one option you could do. You know, do like a Weed Be Gone or any of the typical broadleaf herbicides, spring and then fall, and that'll help suppress it. But that's about all we can. I mean, otherwise, just try to get the lawn growing as vigorously in that area as you can, and water, fertilize, that sort of thing. But you know, other than that, just kind of keep at it, keep chipping away, keep knocking it back, and eventually, hopefully, you'll get on top of it. Otherwise, just spot treating with, of course, Roundup and reseeding is the, you know, kind of the nuclear option as well.
All right. Sunburst honey locust. Planted last September. It's 6 feet tall and scrawny, I believe is what they have written here. Starting to bud out normally, but also budding out all along the tree trunk from the base up to the branches. Planted on the east side of the house. Should she pinch off all those little buds on the trunk or just leave them alone?
Well, you know, she can do either. In fact, you know, that's normal for a young honey locust to have the stems break bud. And if she wants, just take a gloved hand and run it right down the stem and they'll come right off. However, there is an advantage of leaving them because they are producing food. They're not robbing food from the plant, and that food will go to make a stronger stem. So if they didn't mind letting them grow out for a year or two, I mean, the trunk will look kind of shaggy, and putting them off still when they're smaller than her little finger, she'll actually get a stronger tree for it. But if she wants, she can rub them right off too.
Okay. Now we're going to stretch you a little bit here and see how diverse and versed you are on other locations. Mitchell, however, in their house they have a grapefruit tree in a pot. It's 5 feet tall. He heard that there are soil requirements to help keep a grapefruit healthy. He would appreciate any information about amending soil to keep his grapefruit healthy and doing well. Maybe one day it'll even bear fruit. Do you need a male or a female to produce fruit for a grapefruit tree? How far south
I could
do you go,
answer that,
John?
but this is family hour. But short answer is nah. It's happy all by itself. The flowers are perfect, but probably not likely to see fruit under those situations. How big does he want it to get? And that's going to be something we probably don't have an answer to. But I would recommend repotting it in the spring. You know, put it in a little bit bigger pot than it was, and in this case you do want to use a good potting mix because it's spending its whole life in the soil. But I found usually those soils tend to sour after a bit, and I would, when I used to grow grapefruit trees, and I actually did in pots, but try to wash off a lot of the older soil, put it in a little larger pot, add new soil to it, and if he really wants to help it along, stick it outside for a while. They do very well out there. The only problem I found is sometimes they do pick up scale and a couple of other insect problems, but in that much better sunlight and that, boy, do they grow, and they'll flower better for it.
But nothing really special as far as pH or anything, other than just what we have in our soils.
No, just
normally.
the potting mix is going to be sufficiently acidic enough to do it and have enough organic matter to grow the tree. The biggest thing he's going to be fighting is dry air during the wintertime. And the very, 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 very low light levels in a house. I mean, even 2 feet from a window, the light levels are low enough that that plant is probably not going to produce sufficient food in order to flower. That's why a lot of people set them outside during the summer months to make sure they're actually able to photosynthesize.
All right. Pear and peach trees. The viewer would like to plant a pear and a peach tree, but only one of each. Are there any self-pollinating varieties, and could you recommend any hardy to South Dakota?
Well, you know, for the pear, it's relatively easy to find ones that are hardy for South Dakota, but it's not to find one that's self-pollinating. Pears do require cross-pollination, and while Bartlett pears tend to be self-pollinating in California and some of the other areas, in South Dakota, frankly, you really do need to have 2 trees, and you need to make sure you have 2 trees that produce sufficient pollen to pollinate one another. Parker and Patton tend to be one or the other one of those we tend to plant with either Gourmet or Luscious, the 2 varieties developed in South Dakota. For peaches, a Reliance peach is probably the toughest one that we have. Coronation is another one that may be really tough to find. It's from Vermont, hardy to about -25, -30, a little bit hardier than Reliance. And if they really want to try to grow a peach and have it actually flower and fruit, that's the one I would probably recommend. Make sure they plant it on the north side of their home, not the south side, so you get the flowering delayed a little bit. And they may get rewarded with peaches now and then. But yeah, it's
May. Okay.
May. Buy peaches. That's my recommendation.
Okay. Mike, earlier on in the rotation here that we had with Roundtable, you mentioned buttercup weed. And they have it here, but their question really deals with it's in the yard, and they have several species of pines, trees, elms, Russian olive throughout the lawn, and they don't really want to damage the trees, but still control the buttercup weed, and that's Wall, South Dakota.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the good things about this bird buttercup is that it comes on. I mean, it's pretty much as soon as the snow starts melting is when you need to get out there, and it's such a small little weed. You really need to get close to the soil and look for that tiny little plant growing there. And if you're going to use herbicides, that would be the time. And you know, coincidentally, that's, you know, a lot of the leaves are not out yet. And so it's a good time to be spraying, and you know, because your garden's not in. This is usually early April we're talking about, first maybe week or second week of April. You know, so it's very early, a safe time to be spraying. Trees won't be quite susceptible. So you could spray just a typical broadleaf herbicide, Trimec, Weed Be Gone, any of those things, and that may give you some control. But also in the meantime, so you already missed that window this year. The burrs are produced, you're too late. In the meantime, what you could try to do is just get that turf, you know, growing as best as you can. Whether it's, you know, maybe do a little bit more watering, get some shade tolerant type, you know, turf type species in there, maybe buffalo grass, that type of stuff. Try some different options to get the turf going, because otherwise you're probably going to continuously battle this burr buttercup.
Do did you mention, is fall an option at all, or spring is the time to?
Yeah, it's just spring. It's growth. It's an annual, so it only grows for about 2 weeks, and then it matures, and then it's done, and it doesn't grow in the fall again. But it just leaves those burrs behind all summer long. And so, no, spring is about the only time for a foliar type herbicide spray.
All right. Lilac. What's the secret for keeping cut lilac fresh in the vase? Besides water.
Secret?
Anybody have any special?
No, water is just about it. Again, you can get a lot of other stuff people do. They put a little 7-Up in it for the sugars. I hear aspirin. I'll bet there's perfume in one of them. All right, but
Lilac, of course.
Yeah, lilac. Yeah, but no, really, the best thing is cut them in the morning. Don't cut them in the afternoon. They're already dehydrated a little bit already, and stick them in a vase right away with water.
Okay, with the water.
That's it. Keep them in the shade. Don't put them in the sunlight.
All righty, good. Potatoes and onions. Best time to plant potatoes and onions. When can they get them in? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'm going to plant mine this week.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The sooner the better.
Sooner the better, yeah.
They're
for
cool
those.
season crops. You want them in.
With the tomatoes, is it almost too cool here lately for the tomatoes, or?
Right, I think it is. Tomatoes, you'd want to wait a little bit. You don't want to have any frost danger with tomatoes or peppers, but potatoes, they can go in early as first part of April. Onions are the same way. They can get in as soon as possible.
They can tolerate some cooler temperatures, and even if you don't really have to worry about cooler temperatures until you actually get green growth coming up above the ground. So I think if they could get them in, and if they are predicting cold weather, throw a little straw or something on them and pull it back off after the cold weather's passed. Ponderosa pine in the Black Hills. Are there any other trees mistakenly identified as ponderosa pines? And what are the characteristics that properly identify a tree as a ponderosa pine?
You know, there really aren't too many trees that should be confused with ponderosa pine out there, but basically, to be a pine, it has to have needles in clusters. So if it has single needles, you're probably looking at a spruce, but if there's needles in clusters, then it's a pine. Ponderosa pine is the only pine out there that has needles in clusters of 3. So if they're in clusters of 3, and they're between 4 and 11 inches long, you are looking at a ponderosa pine, absolutely. However, ponderosa pine may also have needles in groupings of 2, just as Austrian and Scots pines do. However, ponderosa pine tends to have the longest needles. So if the needles are more than 6 inches long, even in 2s, it's most likely a ponderosa pine. If it's in needles of 3 of any length, then it absolutely is a ponderosa pine.
All right. We have one here, slugs. Viewer has an exceptional amount of slugs in the flower bed already. They tried the slug bait and beer, I assume the beer, yeah, on the slugs, but haven't had enough control with these. Any other suggestions? He hates to waste the beer on the slugs.
Yeah. Well, you use stale beer, too.
Yeah, it should be stale beer from what I hear. So.
Yeah.
Old beer is best.
There is one other product out there for slugs, and that product that could be used in gardens is Sluggo. It's an iron phosphide is what it is, and would work.
How about the metaldehyde? I had some of that. I purchased it last year and used Sluggetta or something like that was the name.
Yeah.
It's a metaldehyde product.
Right, and that's used in agricultural settings. I don't know if it's labeled
I
for
bought
joint
it at the
use.
garden
Okay,
center. So
then
yeah,
that would be another one that would work as well.
The various slug baits are available. Now, one thing I heard one time is that you need to follow the directions, because if you get too much bait in one spot, it actually repels them away from the bait versus sprinkling it out. So make sure that you follow what those labeled directions are and application rates for that. They have a hedge, Creeping Jenny, in a 70-year-old hedge of buckeye on east and north sides of their lot. Can she control a Creeping Jenny in her hedge? And I assume keep the hedge.
Yeah, no. Yeah, there's really no. I mean, Creeping Jenny is a real tough weed. And I guess you could go back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, was with timing. If you want to use some of these herbicides, the ones that have dicamba in them, the Weed Begons, the Trimex, that sort of thing. Timing is key, and maybe you could go on in late fall. A lot of these low-growing creepers will stay green pretty late, maybe into mid-October, that type of thing, when your trees are starting to go dormant. And so then that way you can get the weed, but then you can kind of minimize some of the potential injury from vaporization of those herbicides into those tree leaves, or bush leaves. So that might be an option. Just kind of wait until fall and when those leaves are off, and then things will be a little safer. In the meantime, this summer, you can try to just mulch and that sort of thing to suppress the creeping jenny as much as possible. But it's a tough weed; it'll probably poke through, and so this late fall is going to be the best time to go after it.
Yeah. Crabapple tree. Is there any way to prevent crabapples from blooming? This viewer does not want the berries or fruit from the tree because of the mess.
From blooming? I think we're a little late. They are blooming. But if you say, well, I don't want it to fruit, there are some products on the market. Florel, fruit eliminator, for example. You can find that at garden centers. The timing of the sprays is critical. Most of them are sprayed at full bloom, maybe slightly afterwards. So they're going to need to get down to a garden center and buy the product relatively quickly, depending on where their crabapple is in terms of blooms. And that works extremely well. Is 50% 7 used to be used after bloom, because obviously that's deadly to bees, but as a way of preventing the fruit from forming. But you're not going to be able to find that really anymore. So buying the fruit eliminators, and I've had pretty good success. I mean, 90%. You're not going to eliminate them all, but you'll cut it back by about 90%. And if they say, well, I like crabapple flowers, but I don't like the fruit, you might consider planting spring snow, and that's the crabapple in full bloom on campus right now. I mean, it's beautiful, and the ground is littered almost as though it snows once the petals drop, but it doesn't produce any fruit. And so that's a very popular crabapple for that reason.
Okay. Mike, you talked a little bit about crabgrass. This viewer has crabgrass in his lawn. He would like to spray, but when is the best time to spray? Does he really need to wait till it's 70 degrees or above?
Well, with the crabgrass, the temperature isn't so important. I mean, we still have time. It's probably not quite up yet in your lawn. If you have grass, I mean, maybe you need to send in a picture or that sort of thing. If you do have grasses already coming up in your lawn, weedy grasses, they're probably perennial grasses like quackgrass or smooth brome. So, that would be a whole different type of situation. So send us a picture and then we can properly identify the problem. Because those perennial grasses, really all you can do is spray those with Roundup and then reseed. And so that's a major commitment. So unless you have a real bad problem or you just can't stand, those perennial grasses, that's the only option we have there. But the crabgrass, those are just annual grasses. Those are not up yet. We still got some time to put some pre-emergence herbicides down, like the weed and feeds, that'll control them before they germinate or before they emerge. So annual grasses, we can control those with pre-emergence herbicides. But if you have grasses up right now, it's probably a perennial. And sprays other than Roundup won't work.
All right. Bur oak, John, planted from seed about 2.5 weeks ago, had acorns in the machine shed that he overwintered, split some of them, so he planted some of the split acorns and some whole acorns. What kind of germination should he expect, and when should he expect them to pop up through the soil if they do germinate?
Probably not going to get a lot. Bur oaks, I like to plant those seeds in the fall. They actually do better if they go through a warm period in the fall than a cold period during the winter in the soil. So you may not get as good a germination as you'd like. If the garage was heated in any way, he's probably going to get very poor germination as well. I'm assuming it wasn't. But bur oaks are one of those plants that it's best to get them in the garden in the fall, buried slightly, so they go through that slightly warm period and then they go through a cold period. Maybe 1 in 10 he might get.
1 in 10?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Another quick question, is the white pine a good tree for her area? And this is Woolsey.
Probably not. I mean, we've got one growing in Midland of all places that's just amazed me. But getting down towards Platte, they've got some beautiful specimens. Over to DeSmet, we have some beautiful specimens there, south and east. They do quite nicely. But Wolseley, I don't know. It'd be worth a try. I mean, there's a drop-dead gorgeous redbud growing in Wolseley that probably doesn't know where it is. So it might just be a little nicer climate than expected, but try it, but don't be surprised if it doesn't make it.
Okay. Anybody want to do prairie dogs? Nope. All right. Real quick, how do you start another plant from clematis? Is it possible to start them from cuttings or some other way?
No, that's one you buy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll make that our last question for the night then. So they'll have to get some information there. So. Yeah. Okay. So, well, and that's all the time we have tonight, this evening. And to let you know, Gardenline does repeat twice a week in South Dakota, public broadcasting digital channel. 3 also known as the Create channel, and the encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturday at 4 p.m. Check your local listing and find SDPB TV 3. Thanks to our panel of experts, John Keykafer from Brookings, County Extension Agronomist, and John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, Larry Osborne, Extension Pathologist, and Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist. Thank you to our phone volunteers, the North Central Agricultural Research Lab, and thank you for watching and calling in, and have a good evening, and we'll be in touch next week. Have a good evening.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.